Good morning and welcome to This Week in the Triangle. My name is Stephen Horn. I'm an independent journalist here in North Carolina. So let's talk about some stories over the past week here in the Greater Triangle area of North Carolina. We've got some stories from Durham, Wake County, Johnson County, and I think that's about it for this week. So let's get into our first story. And so we have Duke Law Journal caught circumventing affirmative action ban with personal statements. So in 2023, there was a landmark Supreme Court decision: Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina and versus Harvard. So when the Supreme Court ruled on this, basically striking down affirmative action, striking down their overt discrimination against white and Asian applicants, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, "Despite the dissent's assertion to the contrary, universities may not simply establish through application essays or other means the regime we hold unlawful today." So, universities are not allowed to explicitly discriminate on the basis of race in admissions, and they're also not allowed to use proxies such as personal statements or admission essays to achieve the same goal of discriminating based on race. But what we see at Duke Law School is an example, apparently, of what exactly Chief Roberts is mentioning there, where the Duke Law Journal is using personal statements that they're grading on diversity to select applicants, and that appears to be very much in violation of this Supreme Court ruling and the federal law that it is based on. So this is reporting from the Washington Free Beacon, and they obtained an application packet that was sent out to so-called affinity groups. So these are basically, sort of associations of various intersectional identities, Asian Americans, Black Americans, whatnot, these affinity groups. And so the Duke Law Journal, which is it does appear to be published by the Duke University School of Law itself. It's not an independent institution. So they sent out this application packet just to these affinity groups, which would apparently illegally give them an advantage anyway. But the scoring rubric described in this application packet makes it clear that up to half the points for an applicant's personal statement may be awarded based on their diverse voice and or proof of having, quote, meaningfully advanced the interests of communities with diverse perspectives and experiences. So if they've been a leader of one of these affinity groups, for instance, they can get points in their personal statement. And the personal statement is up to a third of the acceptance criteria. And so basically, in case the instruction to, quote, discuss traditional diversity, race, gender, ethnicity in the personal statement wasn't enough, they also provided examples of personal statements. And what do you know? None of them were for white applicants, and one, the applicant is a Latino/Latina student, an Asian American woman and the daughter of immigrants, a Middle Eastern Jewish woman, and a Latino woman. So basically all of their examples of these personal statements to, let these affinity groups know how they, can best score on one of these applications are non-white students, apparently pretty clearly making it clear that that is what they want and that is their intent with their personal statements, is to be able to use these DEI criteria even though they are illegal as per the Supreme Court. Now, whether or not anything will happen about this, who knows? Because a law only has as much power as men with guns who are willing to enforce it. So, unless there's a lawsuit or unless there is some overseeing authority that makes sure the law is followed, this could be very well going on at every single law school in the country, and we wouldn't necessarily know about it. Because I think this is very reflective of how both the educational institutions and the law profession as a whole has been captured by leftist ideology. So there's nothing about being a lawyer that is explicitly left-wing, but when you have the educational institutions, when you have the organizations like the bar organizations in many states are very much captured by the left wing, it puts a whole slant on the entire legal system and the entire court system, because judges are often just promoted lawyers, so they're coming from the same pool and often have the same biases. Our next story from the week is from Wake County. So, an illegal alien charged in the Wake deputy's murder pleads guilty to prison escape. So, this is a story we have been covering for a while. 4 Mexican nationals who are illegal aliens, all siblings, have been charged in relation to the 2022 murder of Wake County Sheriff's Deputy Ned Bird. And our story this week is about Alder Alfonso Marin Sotelo. So he is one of the 2 brothers charged with actually murdering Deputy Bird. He was shot, I believe, in the back of the head 3 times. He had pulled over to investigate a vehicle that was parked on the side of the road in the middle of the night. This was in southeast Wake County. And he was ambushed and shot. So these 2 brothers were charged in his murder, and Alder Alfonso Marin Sotelo was being held in a Virginia jail pre-trial because he was also facing charges for an earlier traffic stop in Chapel Hill, where it had been discovered that he was carrying a gun as an illegal alien. He had a gun in his possession. That is illegal for illegal aliens, double illegal. So while he was being held at this Virginia jail, on behalf of the federal government, he was able to escape with the help of his sister, who, if I remember correctly, she helped acquire a car that was left outside, left some cash in the car. So when he climbed over to the fence and escaped, he was able to get in that car and drive home to Mexico. Now, Alder Alfonso was pretty quickly recaptured in Mexico, but he was able to fight extradition from 2023 all the way up until 2025 when Trump took office and was able to make a deal with the Mexican government to return 29 defendants who are in Mexican custody. So Alder Alfonso is now back in the States. He will be facing trial or perhaps a plea in relation to the murder charges for murdering Deputy Bird, but he has pled guilty to the charges for escaping prison. So these are lesser charges. I believe a maximum sentence of 5 years. He will still be facing the murder charges, but this will clear up that federal case for him. So Alder Alfonso and his older brother Arturo Marin Sotelo are facing these murder charges. The other 2 siblings who have been charged in relation to this is his sister Adriana, who helped him escape from prison in exchange for giving cooperating testimony. She was only sentenced to 10 months in prison, and the government agreed not to deport her. So that was her plea agreement for the prison escape. The 4th sibling, Rolando Marin Sotelo, he was the youngest, and he was charged with accessory after the fact for allegedly disposing of that vehicle the brothers had been driving that night. Now, I've covered this story in more depth in a previous article. I won't go over all the details, but basically, all 4 of these illegal alien siblings enter the country illegally. The youngest, Arturo, the youngest, Rolando, he was caught crossing the border multiple times as a minor. He had been sent back, and then he was released into the interior of the United States. All 4 of these siblings were living in North Carolina, some of them longer than others. They had had previous encounters with law enforcement where they had been pulled over and it was discovered that they were driving without license, without insurance, without registration, or without tags, and the police just let them go. In Wake County, and then I don't know if there are any counties in North Carolina where this isn't the policy, but with illegal aliens are pulled over when they're driving without licenses, without following any of the normal rules and procedures for driving on our roads, they are just let go. They are not deported, even though, the law enforcement is very much aware that they are here illegally. They didn't just break the law in crossing the border. They're breaking the law by not following these basic practices and procedures we have for making sure our roads are safe. Yet when they violate these, they're just allowed to continue living their illegal existence here in North Carolina. And our 3rd story of the week is related to 3 apparent instances of attempted suicide by cop. So this week, 3 Wake County deputies responded to a call in southern Wake County regarding a man who was threatening to harm himself, and so when they arrive, Brian Jacob Monroe, 32, allegedly opened fire on them. They returned fire. One of the deputies was injured, and Monroe was taken to the hospital in critical condition, but apparently he survived. So the 3 deputies are on administrative leave, which is protocol, and is being investigated by the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, which is also normal in cases like this. So, this is apparently one of those instances where someone is suicidal, and instead of simply taking their own life, they, antagonize the police. They put the police in fear of their lives, pose a genuine threat of death or a serious injury to the police. Then the police are forced to respond with deadly force, as in this case, though, as we know, shooting someone does not always result in them being dead. And was actually struck me this week is that there are 2 other stories with developments from shootings earlier in this year that apparently had the same kind of motive, where people are trying to use the cops to take their own life. And so that second story is from the Durham Police Headquarters. So Joshua Farmer, 19 years old, was brought in by the Durham police, wanted for questioning regarding the shooting of another juvenile. This was on May 14th. So, according to the autopsy and medical examiner's report that was released this week, Farmer lunged for one of the officer's handguns when they were changing out his handcuffs. There was a struggle over the handgun. It was 3 officers who were wrestling Farmer for control, and he ended up being shot in the neck and head, and passed away. And so, according to the report, Farmer was heard to have quietly said, "Just shoot me," multiple times during the struggle. And so the report was inconclusive as to who actually had control of the gun, who fired those fatal shots, whether it was the officers or Farmer himself. Um, but apparently, based on the witness statements, this is another case where he was wanting to die either by a self-inflicted wound or by forcing the cops to take lethal force against him. And a third story from Johnson County related to a shooting in February. This was another shooting that did not end up being fatal, but 2 Johnson County deputies responded to a call in February regarding an intoxicated man who was threatening to harm himself and threatening to get in a shootout with deputies. And when the deputies arrived, Anthony Wayne Collins, he had a handgun in his pocket that he observed. They tell him to get on the ground, to raise his hands. He doesn't comply with their orders. Instead, he starts running away. He's reaching for his gun, and so they open fire and shoot him multiple times. But once again, he survived, because this is not necessarily a particularly effective way of taking your own life, because if you look at the statistics, many shootouts, even with multiple injuries, are often survivable. Though you definitely shouldn't rely on that if you're being shot at by anyone. But if someone is shooting at you, yeah, you might have to hit them a few times before they're down, and that is why everyone should own a firearm with at least a 30-round magazine, because you never know how many shots it'll take to actually incapacitate someone, especially if they're drunk or on drugs or otherwise have some altered mental state that might keep them going longer than you would expect a normal person to be able to. And so for our last story of the week, this is actually another shooting, but tragically in this case, the victim was a 5-year-old child, and this was apparently a case of road rage on Highway 1 in Cary. So Charles Edward Stevenson Jr., 20 years old, has been charged with an assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, discharging a weapon into occupied property, and assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, inflicting serious injury. So this 5-year-old child was shot in the leg. She did survive, but she required serious surgery and is expected to recover in 4 to 6 months. So according to the child's father, what happened is that Stevenson was driving erratically, and he threw something out of his car at another driver and ended up hitting the vehicle, the Ford F-150, that the father of the shooting victim, was driving. So the father calls the police, lets them know that there's this crazy person on the road, But they're separated in traffic. This was in rush hour, I believe 6 p.m. So there's a lot of traffic. They're separated. Later, they both come within sight of each other again, and the father attempts to get Stevenson attention, apparently because he had called the police on him and whatever. I don't know exactly why he was trying to get his attention, but that is when Stevenson allegedly pulled out his gun, fired into the father's vehicle, and struck the child. So these are our various charges, very serious charges he is facing. We have his mugshot here from the Wake County Bureau of Forensic Services. That's his mugshot. And, kind of a crazy story. You generally have a pretty good idea of which neighborhoods are safe, which neighborhoods aren't safe. The shootings in Raleigh and Durham are very heavily concentrated in just a few neighborhoods. Apparently, maybe the neighborhoods where people like Stevenson live. But on the highway, you never know who might be in the car next to you, and you never know if they are one gesture away from shooting you. So in this case, the father is definitely right in calling the police. Maybe not so wise in trying to get this road rager's attention, because he then did shoot and very easily could have killed a child. Even getting shot in the leg can be fatal if it hits the wrong artery, hits the wrong vein. But praise be to God, this child did survive and is expected to recover. That's all the stories we have for the week. Head over to triangletrumpet.news to sign up to receive these weekly roundups of stories in your inbox each week, or to support the work I do. And if you've been tuning in, thanks for being here.